Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining my talk, Social Engineering the Interview. I am super excited to present this information. It is something that I have been planning in my head for quite some time, and I'm just really excited that it has come to fruition and I get to present it to you guys. Again, thank you so much for joining me. I know there was some really great content out there that's going on in the conference, so I'm super excited that you guys, chose to come and be a part of this. So a little bit about me and why you might consider giving any weight to anything I say. So my name is Ursula, or Ushi Cowan. Just a little who am I? My most important job right now is being a mom to my amazing 3.5-year-old, who, if you follow me on Twitter, you probably know I refer to him as Bubs. And he is especially gifted with autism. He's wicked smart and totally keeps me on my toes. So I started my path to InfoSec in not a completely traditional way. I retired from being a police officer, having worked the last half of my career as a detective. I investigated special victims crimes, which included child abuse, child death and homicide, sexual abuse, and online child exploitation, or what now is sometimes referred to as child sexual assault material. I worked on the Secret Service's Electronics Crimes Task Force. The Secret Service has a training facility called the National Computer Forensics Institute out in Hoover, Alabama. And it was there that I was trained in digital forensics investigations. After getting pregnant with my Bubs, I decided to get out of law enforcement. My oldest son told me that he used to spend a lot of time worrying about me when if I was going to come home or not. And I knew I didn't want to worry my family anymore. So prior to my forensics training, I had earned my degree in applied psychology, and I have a minor in forensic psychology. After my agency lost their forensic examiner, they came to me as I had shown an interest in the past and had been trained on a kind of down and dirty level to do mobile forensics when he was out on paternity leave. So they came to me and I obviously agreed and was super excited actually to get into forensics. And that's really when I found my love of all things computer and cyber and decided to make a change in my career trajectory. My bonus dad that I had growing up, he was a software engineer. And I never thought in a million years that I would want to do anything computer related. So it's always kind of a funny joke between us. I used to say to him, when he would show me like the code that he was working on, and he did a lot of stuff, DOS prompt, that's, how far back it was. And he would show me and it would take him, 15 minutes to write code to like turn some little button blue. And I used to think to myself, you poor man, your life must be so boring. And so now he jokes with me and tells me, you poor thing, when I'm doing stuff that I'm really excited about. So with my Secret Service training, I was actually able to apply to enter the Digital Forensics Master's program with the University of Florida, go Knights. And eventually I earned my master's degree as well in digital forensics. So I started looking around kind of to see what jobs were out there and to kind of hone my study path in digital forensics. And I found this SOC role with a large defense contractor. And I had no idea what I was getting into. I didn't know what a SOC was. They actually didn't call it a SOC in the description, but I really had no idea what I was getting in for. But I met all but one requirement. And that requirement was for a bachelor's in a computer related field. I figured since I was in the DF program, I hoped that it would make a difference, and it did. I applied and was eventually hired. And then a couple of years later, I moved on to my current role, which is a threat research analyst with Mandiant. The TLDR of my role at Mandiant is basically that I get to take technical research of tactics, techniques, and procedures of adversaries, such as ABT groups, FIN groups, pretty much any cyber threat actor that is relevant. And I get to break down those TTPs into their basic behaviors and then replicate them within our validation platform so that our customers can use our content to validate their security controls. I work with a team of analysts and engineers as part of a team called the Behavioral Research Team, or BRT. But more specific to this talk, I've been trained in interview and interrogations by one of the founding members of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, Homeland Security. And some of the best homicide and sex crimes detectives I've ever had the pleasure to know. During my undergrad, I spent a lot of time learning about human behavior. I wanted to be the best detective I could be. I wanted to right wrongs, both put bad guys in jail and keep good guys out of jail. Good interview techniques are really just about rapport building and learning to recognize body language, facial changes, and anything else that is not part of the person's baseline behavior. Everyone is different, and we're going to discuss how to apply techniques that will work with a variety of different types of people and situations. So what are we going to cover? So we're going to talk a bit about the psychology behind social engineering and different human traits that social engineers often take advantage of, that we can take advantage of to help set an atmosphere to create the best environment for you to connect with your interviewers so that you can both decide if something is the right place for you to work and to give yourself the best stage to present yourself. It's just as important to ask your interviewers the right questions to make sure that you want to work there too. So we're going to talk about what we need to do before the interview, what we actually need to do during the interview. And this is going to be the actionable part of this talk where I highly recommend jotting down some notes. You might want to remember, if you don't have notes, that's fine. The slides will be available on my GitHub shortly, if they aren't already by the time this comes around. So, and then I think we'll probably have some time afterwards for, questions. So I don't know how to say Chris's last name. You might know him as the human hacker on Twitter, Chris Hadnagy. He wrote the book Social Engineering, the Science of Human Hacking. And I think he says it best, that social engineering is understanding how and why we make our decisions and what motivates us to make those decisions. Of course, Chris was talking about understanding motivations so we can best defend against negative social engineering, where we're going to talk about how to use these principles in a positive way to make sure we know how to best connect with our interviewers so that we both can make the best hiring decision. So if you thought that social engineering the interview was going to be about how to manipulate the situation, I'm sorry to disappoint you. It's not. We're going to use social engineering principles to kind of create a stage for us to best show ourselves and to best get to know our interviewers so that we can determine if this is a place that, you want to work. So whether you are the interviewer or the interviewee, you have an agenda, right? Your agenda may be getting your dream job, or it might be finding the person best suited for the job. Either way, we can use knowledge of human behavior to accomplish this. Most of this presentation is going to be geared towards the interviewee, but it can easily be extrapolated to be used by an interviewer as well. In fact, I highly recommend it. One of the traits that social engineers use in order to gain access to an unauthorized area or to manipulate a situation is with trust. It's part of the reason that somebody can talk their way into an area of an organization that they don't normally have permission to access. If a person looks like they should be there and talks like they should be there, people will often grant that trust to them. While this seems pretty obvious, what you may not realize is that even if you aren't an extroverted or super charismatic person, you can still accomplish this, okay? I promise. I'd also like to mention here that everything I'm going to present to you today is backed by scientific data. Interestingly, we used to think that stuff like being charismatic, likable, persuasive was an art or something that you were just inherently born with. Well, I'm here to tell you that it is not. This is a skill that almost anyone can learn to acquire and use successfully. I say almost because, some people may have some kind of neurodivergence that might not allow them to, fully use some of these principles, but I think for the most part, if you're watching this, you probably have a pretty good, ability to do it. Okay, so let's talk about what we need to do before the interview, because getting our dream job requires some legwork, well, really keyboard work. We need to do some homework. So what's going on in this place? Have there been any recent acquisitions that are relevant to the position for which I'm interviewing? Compile any questions that you have and that you may want to ask your potential new employer. This is super important, and we're going to circle back around to this later, but for now I want you to plan to do a bit of recon and learn about the organization and specifically the team for which you're applying. Take notes on the company if that'll help. All right, so don't kill me, but dress for success really is a thing. All right, the first thing people see is going to have an impact on their opinion of you. All right, again, this is all scientific research. Luckily, the tech world is pretty open to forms of expression being visible, such as colored hair, tattoos, piercings. But let's have a talk about hygiene, shall we? Let's make sure that we're going into the interview with clean hair, deodorant, and clean clothes. I am not asking you to go crazy here, okay? I just want you to show that you give up about your appearance, because subconsciously we believe that those who are concerned about stuff like their appearance are going to care about their work output or product. So find yourself the best clothes you have. If you don't have anything and you don't have a ton of money, go to a thrift store, grab a pair of slacks, maybe a polo. You can even go for the gusto and wear a suit. If you're online, just grab a nice shirt. And speaking of online, all right, show your face. All right, we're in an odd time and place where a lot of, if not most of our interviews, especially for remote positions, are being done via Zoom, Teams, etc. And it's still an interview. All right, you are still trying to impress these people with your elite skills so that they will want to hire you. Even if the interviewer doesn't show their face, which might be weird and potentially a red flag, still show yours, okay? This helps portray that you are bringing your best self to this interview and that you have nothing to hide. Part of social engineering the interview is for people to know who you are. As we are going to discuss, you have a better chance of getting hired if people like you. You don't have to like it, and I'm sorry if you don't, but it's part of human nature. We are naturally drawn to those people who we like. What we can visualize has a better chance of happening than what we can't envision. What does that mean? Well, it means that if the interviewer can't visualize you working there, then you probably won't. One big focus in our interview is going to be to get them to visualize us working there, but we're going to get a little ahead of ourselves. So, okay, so what do we actually need to do? All right, let's start with meeting the interviewers. All right, we want to extend a warm and genuine greeting. Genuine. I know we aren't really shaking hands these days, so try to make eye contact and smile warmly and genuinely. Smiling puts people at ease. If shaking hands like in the future becomes a thing, then a firm handshake and a smile is going to go a long way. If you're decent at small talk, have a little small talk before you get started. This can help you kind of put yourself at ease, as well as the interviewer. However, don't be unauthentic. I don't even know if that's a word, but you know what I mean. People can always tell when someone is forcing it. So if something isn't your forte, forego it and find something that is. All right, so we're not going to spend a ton of time here. The interview is mostly going to ask you the typical questions you should be expecting. In your recon phase, you should look up potential questions that you may be asked. And I would hope you've studied those notes. So once we're in the interview and having those questions given to us, let's remember a few things. First and foremost, try to stay calm. Take some deep breaths before you start. If you need a moment to compose yourself, take a moment and then answer the questions. Likely there's no time limit if you're face-to-face, and you really want to get your best self out there, right? So no interviewer is really expecting everyone to have the world's most perfect answers. They understand that you are probably nervous, okay? So if you need a moment to kind of settle your brain, then take a moment. Most importantly here, if you don't know the answer to a question, do not answer it as if you do, all right? There's something to be said for confidence, but confidence in places that you should be confident, right? If we don't know the answer, let's not even try to pretend that we do, all right? If it's a question that maybe you have an idea on, maybe something that's somewhat open for interpretation, then say that. I have said in the past, I'm not 100% sure, but here's what I think the answer is based on other prior experience knowledge, based on what you've given me so far, or if it's a question that requires a pretty definitive answer, meaning it really does have a right or wrong answer, like what is port 139 typically used for, and you don't know the answer, then what I would say to that is I would say, I don't have that committed to memory, but I do know that I could find it here, or I have a bookmark with this info, or something like I would do a DuckDuckGo search for this search term. Rarely in this business is there something that we can't stop a moment to figure out the best course of action or learn about a new concept we haven't previously been exposed to, so we can best solve a problem. Knowing where to find the info is just as important, in my opinion, at least, as the info itself. Albert Einstein is famously quoted as saying, "I never commit to memory anything that can easily be looked up in a book." And I totally believe that. I have a zillion different bookmarks for all those things because I don't have all of the ports memorized. I have basics memorized, but I might not know what something is. And so being able to say, this is where I would go and find it, that's what the employer needs to know. We are in a place where a lot of our job in tech is Googling. Somebody else has probably already found the answer and they've already, asked that question. And so we have information at our fingertips. So it's not completely unheard of to say, I might Google that and figure that out. So it's kind of hard to win people over with how awesome we are during the traditional portion of the interview. We are mostly answering questions asked of us to determine our knowledge and experience base, right? And I'm sorry, my dears, but I can't help you social engineer your way through having the right answers. And we really can't hypnotize them into thinking we have all the answers. So what's next? Well, it's what I like to call the reverse interview. But first, let's talk a little bit about the psychology, okay, and ethics. So, I had to address it, right? Dr. Robert C. I apparently picked publications where I can't pronounce the author's name. I think it's Cialdini, Cialdini. Anyways, Dr. Robert C. is the author of a New York Times bestseller book called Influence, and he has a company called Influence at Work, and he's conducted a bunch of research at various universities on pretty much this subject of kind of using kind of building strong relationships at work and how to go about doing that. It's very similar to the principles from social engineering. He just works in a completely different field. He has reported that there are 6 major factors or principles that, when employed ethically, increases our ability to build and maintain stronger relationships at work. At the end of the day, whether you're looking for a new job or looking for a new employee, we want the end result to be successful. We want to find the right fit for us, and the company wants to find the right fit as well. When we're in a successful and satisfying role at work, studies have shown that we are more likely to have happier home lives as well. We work 40 hours or more with these people, with this employer. We need to make sure that where we're working demonstrates similar values to our own. And I will point out that some of these principles can easily be used in other relationships in our lives as well. So it's just something to keep in mind. So Dr. C called them principles of persuasion. And I'm going to highlight just a few of them that we can directly apply in our job interviews. And like I said, really in all aspects of relationships. So these principles come from scientific research into human behavior, and using our knowledge of human behavior to help us form relationships with our interviewers or interviewees so that we can best showcase ourselves or the team or the employer. Remember, we're not trying to manipulate the situation. All right. I attended a law enforcement leadership training many years ago, and the single biggest thing I took away from it, probably the only thing I really remember from it, was a quote by one of the keynote speakers. And the quote was, "We can't motivate others, but what we can do is we can create an environment in which others can motivate themselves." Holy cow, that was a really big kind of mind-blowing thing for me. How that applies here is that we aren't manipulating the interview. We are creating an environment that allows us to showcase our best selves. Because interviews oftentimes, like, that is our time to really shine, to really let these people know about us, and for them to know that we're going to be a good fit. Because honestly, one of the biggest challenges in creating a team of people that are going to work together is not just making sure that you know how to dot your I's and cross your T's, right? It's not just making sure that you know what the difference is between, you know, a proxy and a firewall, or, you know, it's not just the technical portion of it, right? If we have people that understand that, that's wonderful, but we need people to really kind of mesh, because, you know, you're going to be working very closely with these people. And it really is important that the whole team is able to work as a team together. And so during the interview, we need to make sure that our interviewer knows that we are the type of person who's going to mesh well with this team. Or we realize through our own reverse interview that this isn't the team for me. All right, we're going to talk about that more later. But if you look at this side, we see that some of the principles of persuasion include that we like people who are similar to us, pay us compliments, work toward a mutual goal in a cooperative fashion, listen to us. This is really going to come into play later, as well as the last point here, which is that we are, as humans, generally like people who ask us about ourselves and are engaged and interested in what we have to say. So as you can probably see, a lot of these principles are used by social engineers in nefarious ways, right? By paying hollow compliments, a social engineer may be able to get a person to find them charming. And like I've mentioned, and we'll mention again, people respond to people they like. Some of these points show how that happened. And just to reiterate, we aren't going to negatively social engineer our interviewers into anything. We're simply using these principles to create that environment so that we can best showcase ourselves to our interviewers. Even if we did discuss how to negatively social engineer our way into a job role, or tried to, what we need to understand is that studies have shown, and Dr. C specifically mentioned that, you know, if you're deceptive and that deception is uncovered later, it actually will do more damage, because the lie is going to be eventually uncovered, and that could result in a myriad of negative consequences, such as the loss of that job, difficulty finding a job in the future because people talk, and it may not be your boss. It could be just, you know, coworkers. Somebody says, "Oh, hey, didn't you used to work with so-and-so?" "Oh yeah, they said they knew all this stuff, but they really didn't." And word travels, and it can be very difficult to find a job after it's been, you know, after it's been revealed that you lied to your previous employer. And then, like, depending on the severity of the lie and the nature of the lie, you could be looking at legal action as well. So let's just kind of leave it at the Hippocratic Oath of do no harm. And while I know that that historically applies to physicians, it isn't just for doctors and can totally be applied here as well. All right. So in the traditional Q&A portion of the interview, the interviewer is running the show, right? But now we want to reverse this a little bit. When I was a detective, I always crafted my interviews with people in such a way to create an environment that would put them at ease. All right, create a rapport and hopefully gain the information that I needed to successfully investigate a case. Now, I'm not going to talk about police officers and their tactics. I'm well aware that there are officers out there who are not ethical. However, my approach was always to simply find the truth, as corny as that sounds. Once I had the truth, or as close to it as I could get, I would be able to make the best decision about the next course of action. So remember, I investigated sex crimes, child deaths, such as accidental deaths, potential homicide. I mean, these are the types of crimes that can ruin a person's life just with an accusation. And let me tell you, it feels just as good to exonerate an innocent person as it does to put a child molester or a baby killer in prison for the rest of their lives. So, but we first have to get the truest information. And to do that, we need to get a positive rapport with whomever we're talking to. So how do we do this? I'm so glad you asked. What I'm going to teach you is how to interview your interviewer. When I was hired with Mandiant, my awesome recruiter, Elliot, who I give ginormous shouts out to, he gave me the absolute best advice I've ever been given before an interview. I was looking to relocate from Florida to DC, and it was going to be just me and my bubs. And Elliot said to me, interview them just as hard as they interview you. My very first thought was, oh my gosh, how hard are they going to interview me? But he reminded me that I was looking to relocate my entire life there. He said, make sure these people and this job is worth it. Good God, that was so mind-blowing to me. My focus had been on getting these people to to like me and I wanted to show them that I was who they wanted to answer, who they wanted to hire. But like when he said that to me, my focus was immediately like, oh, okay, I know how to do this. So first, we want to build a rapport, okay? And if possible, we want to endear them to us, right? The secret though is we don't say anything for that to happen. We're actually going to ask our interviewers about themselves. And most people actually don't mind talking too much about themselves to an extent. We're not doing any deep probing questions that are personal, but it makes people feel good for someone to be interested in them. And, some more or less than others, but okay, so like I mentioned, we're going to keep it strictly professional, okay? A great starting point. And where we're at this point is we are at the point where, the interviewer says, they ask all their questions. They say, well, that's all my questions. Do you have any questions? And the answer is, yeah, I do actually have a few questions. And I usually try to say like, I'm curious, like, how long have you been here? How long have you worked here? And they give you an answer. And so when we ask these questions, what we want to do at this point is listen. All right. It's really not that difficult. So we're going to ask appropriate follow-up questions and we're going to take our time. This is your time to both learn information, share information, and figure out if you want to work with these people or to show them that they want to work with you. Honestly, it should probably be a little of both. Excuse me. One of my now coworkers told me, he had told me about that he had actually left the company because he had been promised, the world. And when that wasn't the case, he decided to come back. And, I'm going to back up. Take your time with these getting to know you questions, right? Be present and engaged as they speak. Make it obvious that you're listening and that you're interested. Don't pick your nails, don't whatever. Be interested, be engaged. When you feel the rapport building, when you feel like it has gotten to a decent foundation set, then we're going to start asking the harder questions. These are just a couple of the questions to the get to know you type questions. I definitely recommend not, like, don't stick just to this. Have your own questions. These are some good getting to know your questions. But I also think your follow-up questions should, if they say, oh, I've been here for, a year. Oh, well, what'd you do before that? Where'd you come from? Ask some questions. Keep it professional, keep it work related. We don't need to ask them about their family life, but ask those questions. Get to know these people, especially if there's somebody who's going to be on your team. That's really going to give you a lot. So when you feel like the rapport building is good and we're going to start asking the harder questions. Now, listen, no one's going to tell you the team sucks and, oh yeah, Bob's lazy and his code sucks. This is the part of the interview where we are watching for the other person's body language and expressions, not their words. When Elliot asked me what the most important thing to me in a team was, it was easy. I told him I wanted to be with a team that worked as hard as I did, because in my head, I had imagined all the people who I'd worked with over the years that did the bare minimum. And I had to take up their slack. But like I mentioned, no one's going to tell you that the team members are crazy or lazy, crazy. When I asked my coworker about what he thought of the rest of my team, he didn't hesitate. He immediately, with like wide open eyes, an instant smile on his face, he said, oh, they're great. And he said, I told you about the people I worked with at my previous company. And he said, and honestly, they were great. We all worked really well together. He said, but these people, I can honestly say that these people are my friends. His body language was open. There was no shift to suggest that anything he said was not true. And this is a good place to talk a little bit about body language and what we're looking for. So we want to make sure that we have created our rapport as we've listened to our interviewer. We're also watching their body behavior. We want to be aware of what their behavior is like when we know they are telling us the truth, or, pretty sure they are. Then if we see any deviation, we can consider if this is something that's being held back or not. Odds are a question like, how long have you worked here, and other benign questions are going to elicit truthful responses, okay? So we want to observe that, and we want to start asking our more probing questions. We look to see if there's a change. We have to consider that there could be other reasons for deviations from the baseline behavior. But if we see no deviation, then we can believe with a fairly good degree of certainty that they're being completely truthful with us. And as far as my coworker, it was 100% true. My team works amazingly together. They're super supportive of each other. There aren't any rock stars on our team. Like, everyone is the rock star. Basically, I get to work with the Mandiant version of the Beatles. And I know that there's other people who feel that way about their teams at Mandiant, but they're wrong. So I asked this series of questions to everybody. I want to know what the work culture is like. I want to know work-life balance is like. I want to know, just anything and everything. That's what I want to know here. Like I said, it's super important that we are in an environment that is going to allow us to, be happy at the end of the day with what we're doing. All right, so like I said, this is the point where we're asking our probing questions, and, and finding out those answers that maybe would not be the easiest to give, right? So, for example, the team I worked for, or that I work for, was part of a company called Veridim, and they were acquired by FireEye about 6 months prior to my hiring. And I wanted to know how that was going. Like, was the Mandiant because like Mandiant FireEye was my dream employer. But I didn't know what it was like on the inside, or how the former Veridim employees were being treated, or how they liked the change. I knew that no one interviewing me who's essentially representing the company was going to be like, no, it's horrible. But again, it was body language that I was looking for. I had worked in a lot of negative environments in the past, and I was going to avoid that type of situation at all costs. So luckily for me, everyone had positive experiences and relayed that to me very well and very genuinely. But this is the time that we're going to ask any of those questions that you identified during the recon phase. Okay, so this is the one question I urge everyone to ask. Additionally, I always recommend saving this question for last. And there's psychology behind why I do that last. But this question, it does a lot of things in one seemingly simple question. So let's unpack it, okay? First, it brings the spotlight indirectly back to us, right? Without being too showy and too whatever. You're not hired yet. And I hope you're not doing that weird, creepy thing where you act like you're already hired or on a team. There's something to the psychology behind that, but I find this is a better way to create an image of you working in this place without being too overt. It also doesn't use words like if, such as, if I started tomorrow, what advice would you give me? I like to stay away from using words like if when possible, because I don't want to leave like doubts, like I have a doubt that they would hire us, right? So instead we ask, what advice would you give a new employee to thrive and be successful here? This question does so many things. It's obvious that you want to know how to thrive and be successful. It helps the interviewer visualize you in that position. And best of all, they give you actual advice to be successful. It's also super interesting when you interview the multiple different people separately, as opposed to like a panel interview, to see the different responses. Like my senior manager's response was simply to be reliable. And that showed me what was important to him. I asked the VP that interviewed me the same question, and his answer was threefold and has stayed with me. The part that stayed with me the most was to give yourself grace. He told me, we're going to ask you to do things here that no one has ever done before. So you won't be able to Google some things or like find it on Stack Overflow, right? Sometimes you have to step back and give yourself grace when you are having a difficult time. This told me way more about my potential new employer. It told me about their work culture and expectations. It was made perfectly clear that some days were going to be very hard and fast paced, solar winds, but it also showed me that they looked at their employees as individuals and that they valued our mental health. Now, I've given this advice before many times to friends and strangers alike and have had really good success rates. I mean, everything I just gave you is grounded in science. These questions we are asking in our turn to interview are important. Do not be the person who goes in and says, I have no questions. Think of at least a couple beforehand that are specific to your environment and your potential new employer. If you can't think of anything that's like super important to you, feel free to reuse the ones I've given you, but really figure out what is important to you. I always recommend keeping this last question as the last question because I feel like it really does give a heap of information to them about you as well as to you about them in such a simple question. It causes them to visualize you working here and giving you usually actionable advice to be successful. If that advice is to work like 1 billion hours a week, then perhaps they're not the company for you, right? And we need to know some of these things. I've obviously given mostly positive outcomes to the potential questions, but there are equally negative answers that could be given to you as well. So either way, these questions and utilizing the reverse interview technique will help you to find out if this is a company you want to continue to pursue, or wipe your brow and be like, thank you, I dodged that bullet. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. Remember that by taking the time to consider what is most important to us in a job, team, or potential new employer, and crafting those considerations into questions to help us establish a rapport with our interviewers, we are not only showing our interviewers how much we have to offer in an environment, but we helped craft in an environment that we help craft. But we're also seeing what those responses are, and we can best determine if this is the right environment for us to continue to grow and thrive in our careers. So, some people often have asked me, like, what if I'm super introverted? What if I'm not good at small talk? What if I just can't seem to get rid of the nerves? And I think practicing leading up to the actual interview, remember that this is your time too. This is not just your time for, your interviewers to ask you questions. This is your time. This is your time to ask your interviewer questions, because I look at it like I am important. I have things to bring to this job. And so I try to remind myself that this is not just about them liking me, it's about me liking them as well. We should not be looking for jobs and just picking any old job unless we are just absolutely dire to get a job to pay our bills. And that, you know, I get that. But go into it with the mindset of, I'm here to show them why I should be a part of this organization or this team. And also, I'm going to ask them questions because I need them to tell me why I should go and work for them and work for this team. Here's my contact info. If you think of any questions in the future, please feel free to reach out to me. If you use any of the techniques that I've given you today, please let me know how they worked out for you. I'm really hoping for lots of messages of like, I got the job. And then we're gonna move into questions, I think, here in a minute. But please, everybody, have a wonderful rest of the conference. And thank you so much. I know that there was a lot of options for you to choose. Thank you guys so much for choosing to come and hear what I have to say. I hope that you got some value out of it. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody soon. Take care.